All right, so I chose this image because I think that it has a few different types of lighting techniques being used in the same image. And I think that what we'll do is we'll break that down by looking at the image, and then I'll pop up a behind the scenes image of the actual lighting setup from the shoot so that we can analyze that as well. So jumping straight in, one of the things that I like to pay attention to are the catch lights in the eye. In this image in particular, I see a small hard light source right here, and then it looks like there's a larger light source right there. And then because of this highlight and this color, I'm going to attribute a light source here. And then because light obviously travels in a straight line, I would imagine there's another light source coming from here. Now, what could be happening is that there's such a huge light source that's back here that light source is being blocked by whatever this black element is, and then the light is kind of spilling over or shining in from the sides. So instead of there being two separate light sources, maybe there's a light source that's so big that it's able to be blocked by whatever, like a black flag, and then whatever spills over hits onto the sides of my model's face. But because of how punchy or intense this light is, it doesn't feel like it's light that's just kind of incidentally landing on her. It looks like light that's directional and specifically pointing on her sides. All right, so with that being said, what else can we learn by looking at the image? So I'm saying that I see two lights in the eye, and then I'm seeing two lights on the side, and maybe there could be a light source that's coming from above, and that's just because of how much the light wraps over the top. There doesn't seem like there's a dead spot over here. Up here anywhere. It seems like that light makes it all the way around, so there might be an additional light source up here, but what I'm under the impression of is just that light that's coming from this direction is large enough, and the light source that's coming from this direction is large enough that it's kind of connecting at the top. What I will say though is when I look at the center of the model's face, like in this area, let me use a different color. So in this area in particular, there's a blue tint, there's a yellow tint on the sides, but in this area in particular, I don't see any of that, right? That yellow light, even if it's kind of showing up in her highlights or perhaps showing up in the shadows of the face, it's not as intense as it is in this area or as intense as it is in this area. So that light that's coming up the center seems like it doesn't have the same characteristics as the light that's coming from the side. So I just want to kind of keep that in mind as we continue to look at these images, or this image in particular, and kind of analyze the light. All right, so when we pull up this image, it has a similar vibe, right? I see that there's a light source that looks like it's coming from this direction, right? That same light source that's kind of giving me this highlight all up in here, it doesn't make it on this area of her face, but I still definitely see that the light is showing up on her. It just doesn't seem to be making it all the way around. I even get a little piece of it here. I see it on the earring, maybe a little bit on the ear, but it still gives me that darker area in here that doesn't have that same yellow tinge. That could be one of two things, right? The lighting physically could have been moved, but what it looks like to me is just the angle of the model is turned away from the light that would be on this side. So because she turned away from the light that would be on this side, it ends up not making it around to kind of give highlights on both sides of her face. All right, so then we take that same scenario and we look at this image, and on this image in particular, I see that light is showing up over here, the light showing up over here, and then we still have somewhat of like that darker, less yellow area that's coming up the center. I mean, what's interesting about this image in particular is that on this one, I catch a piece of that highlight on the nostrils and even on the side of the lips, but it never seems to make it straight down the center. Even in her T-zone, right, I don't necessarily see much. As a matter of fact, let's actually look at this. If we look straight into her forehead, we see the highlight from another light source, and it doesn't have the same characteristics as the yellow light does that's on the cheek. So that automatically lets me know that there's a light source that either has no gel or has no color to it. Maybe it has somewhat of a blue CT, what is it, a CTB or something like that, but it just looks really neutral here. Whereas over here, I'm getting a very, very distinct yellow tint to the light. And then going back into the eyes, as we looked at before, we still see that singular punchy light source, and then we see a larger light source that's coming from below. It's in both eyes, so you can see it in this eye as well, but we could see that there's that small light source, and then there's a larger light source that's bigger, that's right inside of the eye. All right, jumping straight into the behind the scenes picture, I think that we can kind of dissect this based off of what we've already discussed. So we have a strip box over here. We have another strip box over here. We have an octabox on the ground, right? Let me move this. We have this octabox on the ground, and then we have a beauty dish that's overhead. So based off of this information, we already know that we saw this yellow light that was emitting onto the side of the model's face, which these strip boxes clearly kind of explain. We see that the background is a solid black back here. So because these strip boxes have these grids on them, it basically directs the light so that even though it's going to kind of spread, it won't spread all the way to the black background. And then also there's a significant amount of distance between our model and that background. We can say roughly like 6 to 8 feet of distance between the background and the model. Then with the octabox that's on the floor, it's at a really low power, so that as it starts to shine or emit the light up, it doesn't have enough power coming out of it so that it overpowers the strip lights that are on both sides, because we want those strip lights to have a specific characteristic that sticks out when you look at the image. And then to kind of help support that overall effort, we have the beauty dish that's overhead. That, excuse me, I shouldn't say overhead, but it's over my head as the photographer, but it's still out in front of the model, that shining light, so that we can kind of get that light to line up right up in here, so that when we have this yellow light that's coming from this side, right, and that yellow light that's coming from this side, we use this beauty dish to kind of stay in that T-zone, and then we use this octabox that's on the ground as a general fill light that's at a very low power, so that we're making sure that we can bring in some of the additional details that might show up in the hair, or that also will show up in the face. But we still want those two, the power of both the fill light on the ground and the beauty dish, to be slightly lower than the amount of light, that are coming from, or that's coming from the strip lights. So ultimately we end up having, we got a one key, which I'm calling the beauty dish. We have a fill, which I'm saying is the octa on the floor. And then we have these two, we'll call them like rim lights. So 2 rim lights. And inside of these strip lights, I have a yellow gel. So that's the reason why we're able to obviously kind of get that yellow light that emits onto our models. All of these are pro photos. And that's it. Here are a few more pictures. And if you find breakdowns of lighting setups like this interesting, you should really check out my lighting recipe guide. It's a step-by-step book that basically shows you how to recreate some of my favorite lighting setups in the studio. I'll show you the setup, I'll show you the lighting I used, I'll tell you where to place it at, and I'll tell you what to look for once you've made your placements. You can find out more information about it in the description of this video. Peace.